Welcome back to Next Level Rides. In today's episode, we're going to answer some intermediate car questions for you. Not quite basic, a little more in-depth, a little more detail for the intermediate car person, we'll say. So we'll get right to it. Question 1. I have an interest working on cars, but no experience. What's the best way to start learning? Best way to start learning, I would say, is read more, and when you're done reading, read again. The way that I learned is I stayed on forums, and we're talking early 2000s. I stayed on forums. I read all the different ways to do a certain thing. We used to have, I believe they were called Haynes and Chilton manuals. So of course it would be a manual where there's a bunch of pictures. They end up taking the engine apart and the vehicle apart. So you end up learning the ins and outs. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of reading. Nowadays, you have YouTube, which is a fantastic reference for anything you need to do. Many times where I'm not completely familiar on how to do something, even with years of experience, I'll watch a YouTube video, sometimes 2 or 3 YouTube videos. Once I've watched enough of them, then I have the confidence to go and jump into the project or undertake the task. Of course, car groups can be another very good way of learning about specific brands, specific makes, specific models. I've had a Subaru back in the day, although they didn't quite like me on the forum. I still read through all the information, and you take certain things with a grain of salt and you end up learning right from wrong. Other than reading, there's a lot of technical manuals. There's a lot of really good forums for references. You'll find forums and posts from 2000, 2001 that'll give you tons of information. But of course, as the years progress, you'll end up finding more modern answers to those questions, and things have developed in a certain way. At the end of the day, read, continue reading, and eventually you'll get a good grasp of what the platform entails and a good idea as to what you're looking to do. Question 2. What's the difference between oversteering and understeering? Oh boy, one's fun, one's not fun. Let's use snowy roads as an example. Understeering would be when you're going into a corner and your front tires end up losing grip. So when you're turning into the corner and all of a sudden the car is starting to push outwards and towards the curb, which can be a pretty scary endeavor, that's what they call understeering. Now, oversteering it can be the fun one. So typically you'll end up encountering oversteering on a rear-wheel drive and sometimes an all-wheel drive vehicle. In this case, we'll use a snowy parking lot as an analogy. And I know a lot of you have gone down to, what do we call it? Japan? Is that what we're calling it? So you have Mexico for summertime festivities and Japan for, anyways. Oversteering would be when the rear tires end up breaking traction and slide out from behind you. In a parking lot, for example, you can end up doing donuts, sliding the car around. That would be oversteering. Understeering on a road, depending on the vehicle, you can somewhat control, but if you hit ice, I don't care if you have the best of tires, you're losing control, period. Say you're in an off-ramp or an on-ramp and the back end comes around. Typically you want to modulate the throttle. You don't want to get on the brakes right away. You don't want to have any abrupt in jumping off throttle. So you want to be a little bit cautious, modulate the throttle, point the steering wheel where you want to go. And a lot of the time, eventually the rear tires will regain traction if the fronts have not lost the traction, and you will be able to somewhat control it. Now, although it's frowned upon, I recommend everybody in the snowy winter's night, go into a vacant open parking lot, slide your car around and see how it's going to react. You'll be able to experience understeer and oversteer. The most important thing you want to keep in mind when you experience understeer or oversteer is always point the vehicle where you want to go, look at where you want to go, and don't have any sudden or abrupt movements, whether it's stabbing the throttle, getting off the throttle, hitting the brake, or jerking the steering wheel. Try to be very smooth with your inputs, and usually that'll be your best course of action where you experience understeer or oversteer. Again, understeer, scary, nobody likes it. Oversteer, fun, slide it around when it's safe and on private roads and parking lots. I'm not telling you to do it on the streets. We'll get the editor to put a big warning there. I'm not telling you what to do. What is hydroplaning? So similar to oversteering and understeering, hydroplaning, the best way I understand is once your vehicle hydroplanes, there's nothing you can really do to control it. You're basically holding on and probably praying a little bit if that's what you do. Essentially, hydroplaning is when the water is greater than the traction caused or created by the tire on the pavement. So essentially, think of it as similar to ice, where all of a sudden you have no more contact between the road surface and your tire any longer. So essentially your car is now floating on that thin layer of water, or if there's say a little bit of a body of water after a long, hard rainfall on the roadway and you end up hitting it, there's no traction and there's no contact between the tire and the road surface. So at that point, you're just waiting for the car to slow down, where it ends up, I don't know, I guess you could think of it as sinking through the water to where the tires are not going to contact the road surface again, or hoping that you can keep it away from a curb, but there's nothing that can help control it. Whether it's braking input, throttle input, or input with the steering wheel, you're basically holding on and hoping you don't hit anything. Always drive for the conditions and for the road surface. For example, the road conditions, whether it's ice, rain, or dry pavement, or it could even be after, like in the fall, where you end up having leaves on the side of the road. You need to consider that that leaf is now going to be a layer between the road surface and your tire, and you're not going to have the maximum amount of traction. So drive according to the conditions and be smart about it. Question 4, can I switch to synthetic oil or a different grade of oil? Of course you can. Now, a lot of the times they say if you end up going to synthetic oil, you cannot go back to regular or mineral oil, and vice versa. I don't quite believe that. Like, I've done it back and forward, and typically when you end up going to synthetic oils, you don't go back to mineral oils anyways. A lot of vehicles, for example, my Honda CR-V, it's meant to use 530 just regular mineral oil. The reason I go to synthetics on every one of my vehicles, minus the RX-7, but that's a whole other story and explanation that'll take the entirety of a video. Synthetics pour quicker when cold. They protect the engine a lot better, and they flow a lot better. Those are some pretty basic reasons to use synthetic, but there are many other benefits. I went from a 530 oil to a 540 oil. And the thing you need to keep in mind is the initial number is the cold weight, so 5, and it retains the same as what it was required, but the larger number is the operating weight, or the hot weight. So being a 40. Between 530 and 540, the 540 will have better protection for hotter climates, or if you're driving the vehicle a little bit harder, so it protects a bit better. So yes, you can run synthetic oil. Yes, you can run a little bit different grade oil, but typically you would want to probably just go one step above best case. Could you go from a 530 to a 550? I probably wouldn't. Now, if you end up building an engine and you have your engine builder recommending a specific weight for the tolerances of your engine, by all means, follow what they're saying, because they've put the engineering and they've put the faith in that engine build. So listen to what they say. Going up from 530 to 540, it's perfectly okay. There's quite a few benefits and there really aren't any cons. So question 5, what is the difference between 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, and an 8-cylinder engine? Well, I mean, there's 1-cylinder, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever. There's many different kinds, but typically a 4-cylinder engine would be either transverse or longitudinal. So you have 4 cylinders in a line, whether it's in any different way. So on some Audis, you'll find it front to back with the transmission at the back, or most Honda Civics, it'll be completely sideways with the transmission on the side driving the one axle. Now, those are the typical differences with a 4-cylinder engine. Now, obviously you have Subarus, which are H patterns. So you have 2 cylinders on one side, 2 on the other. 6 cylinders typically would come in 2 different orientations. You could end up having an inline 6-cylinder, like a lot of BMWs, a lot of Toyota Supras and Skylines. So they sound great, they work really well, and they're one in front of the other. Now, other 6-cylinder engines could be in a V. So you have 3 on one side, 3 on the other side. Typically more conventional vehicles, domestic vehicles, would have V-style engines. Some Audis have V-style engines. I think the newest S4 has a turbo in the middle. Really cool setup. And then 8-cylinder engines. There are old 8-cylinder engines that are in line. I think the reason they kind of shied away from that was maybe vibration, but we're talking like years ago, far before my time. Now, when it comes to performance, 4 cylinders, typically they're in line, so you'll have the exhaust manifold on the one side. So Hondas, you'll just have one turbo hanging off the front and you're off to the races. Inline 6s, I am a huge fan of them. Usually there's turbos on just one side of the engine. So whether it's the left or the right side between RB and 2J, inline 6s tend to be my preference. V6s, now usually with V6s, if they're twin turbo, you would have one on either side, which is still good, but it seems to be, and I'm probably gonna get shot in the foot for this one or whichever. Inline sixes tend to sound better, they tend to perform better, and they tend to be easier to work on as opposed to V6s. And V8s, I mean, that's a whole other ball game. Performance is all somewhat relative. I mean, it's not asking my preference, but inline six turbo, that's where it's at. Question 6, what do you think is the best car for the money? What's a cheap one and a $30,000 to $50,000 car? I mean, if you're getting a cheap car that's not a project car, get anything Toyota. Get anything late 90s, early 2000s Toyota. Get a Corolla or a Camry. They're gonna run for 400,000 or 500,000 kilometers, no issue. If you want something, no headache, you just need to change the oil, tires, and check your pressures, change a couple fluids, that's what you wanna get. Other than the Corolla, you could get a Civic hatchback too. It's just their stupid price now. Like, I remember back in the day, you could get a bubble hatch for 600 bucks. That would be what I want, but there's no way I'm paying 6 grand for a rusted, beat automatic Civic hatch, no way. As for a car around the 30,000, now we're talking 30,000 Canadian pesos. We're not talking 30,000 US dineros. Honestly, what I would probably do is probably get like an E70 BMW X5. So we're talking 09 to 2012, maybe even the later models with the M57 diesel engine. That's what I would recommend. Get a really nice, clean, low mileage one for 14, 15,000. Fully delete the thing, get rid of all the emissions. You'll be into it for maybe $20,000. That'll be your best bang for the buck. And again, we're not at that $30,000 mark. For under 20,000, maybe 16,000. That'd be a fantastic vehicle. Now around the $50,000 mark, maybe I'll pick two. So my 540, typically they're around $40,000 right now. Of course, I paid less for mine, but for the $40,000 mark, the G30 BMW 540, so we're talking 2017 to 2019, is a fantastic vehicle for $40,000. Tons of luxury, knock on wood, dead reliable, has a B58, makes a decent amount of power if you want it to, but at the end of the day, you still have all the luxury and amenities of essentially the prior 7 Series vehicle. They're fantastic. For 50,000, damn, what would I get for 50,000? Feels like a pipe dream. For $50,000, maybe a shy over, 2016, 2017 X5M. Yep, that would be really good. I think I would personally get a white with red interior. That would be mint. Pick one up with probably 50K on it. That'd be a great vehicle. Well, that's all for the intermediate car questions. Hope you've enjoyed. Some of them were a little bit tricky. I went a bit on a tangent, but I'm sure you can understand what I'm getting at here. Again, as always, keep the questions coming. I'll answer them the best I can. A lot of them will be my opinion, so obviously take it with a grain of salt, but that's all for today. So take care. See you guys next Tuesday.